He'd been working at the brewery for 16 years, monitoring fermentation tanks, checking quality control, helping craft the perfect beer through careful chemical processes. Just another elderly worker trying to stay useful in the food industry. Until a contamination crisis threatened to poison thousands of customers across multiple states. And suddenly the quiet brewery worker revealed why he understood chemical reactions that stumped food safety investigators. Carl Friedrich Weber was 75 years old, with white hair that always smelled faintly of hops and barley, and sharp gray eyes that could detect chemical irregularities in brewing processes through subtle changes invisible to most people. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision despite his age, testing pH levels and monitoring fermentation chemistry, with tolerances measured in parts per million, while his voice carried the methodical cadence of someone who understood that brewing was applied chemistry, where mistakes could affect both flavor and safety. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible tale of hidden expertise and life-saving chemical knowledge, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about quiet masters deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Rocky Mountain Brewing Company occupied a sprawling facility in Fort Collins, Colorado, where traditional craft brewing methods combined with modern quality control to produce over 200,000 barrels of beer annually. The operation involved complex chemical processes that transformed malted grains, hops, and water into alcoholic beverages through fermentation reactions that required precise monitoring to ensure both quality and safety. Carl had worked in quality control for 16 years, monitoring every stage of the brewing process from raw material inspection through final product testing. His responsibilities extended far beyond routine quality checks. He managed chemical analysis that ensured fermentation proceeded correctly, contamination prevention that protected products from dangerous microorganisms, and safety protocols that guaranteed beer met federal standards for human consumption. His approach to brewing chemistry combined technical precision with intuitive understanding of how fermentation processes responded to environmental changes, ingredient variations, and equipment conditions that could affect both flavor development and product safety. Maria, the pH readings on Tank 7 are showing slight acidification that suggests bacterial contamination development. It's still within acceptable ranges, but we should increase our sampling frequency and consider preventative treatment before it affects product quality. These analytical observations represented more than routine quality control. They were advanced chemical process monitoring that prevented contamination problems before they reached stages where entire batches would need to be discarded, or worse, where dangerous products might reach consumers. The brewing management had come to depend on Carl's expertise during complex production challenges. His understanding of fermentation chemistry, ability to identify developing problems before they became serious, and knowledge of contamination control made him invaluable for maintaining the quality standards that separated craft brewing from industrial beer production. What impressed colleagues most was Carl's ability to troubleshoot chemical problems that stumped consulting brewmasters, identifying root causes of flavor defects, contamination sources, and process inefficiencies through systematic analysis that combined laboratory testing with practical brewing knowledge. What none of them realized was that Dr. Carl Weber had spent 37 years developing chemical processes with complexities that made brewing chemistry look relatively simple by comparison. Carl lived alone in a comfortable house 10 minutes from the brewery, surrounded by the mountain views that had attracted him to Colorado after retirement from corporate chemical engineering. The house was well-maintained but unremarkable, furnished with pieces that reflected practical priorities rather than academic pretension. But the basement laboratory revealed technical capabilities that exceeded brewery quality control requirements. The walls displayed chemical process diagrams and research documentation spanning nearly 40 years of industrial chemistry development, petrochemical refining processes that had improved fuel production, pharmaceutical manufacturing systems that had advanced drug safety, and chemical plant safety protocols that had prevented environmental disasters affecting entire regions. Bookshelves held technical references that most chemical engineers would consider advanced material. Process chemistry texts, contamination analysis manuals, and safety procedures for managing chemical reactions that could cause explosions, toxic releases, or environmental contamination. Filing cabinets contained project documentation for chemical processes that had shaped how American industry approached everything from plastics manufacturing to environmental protection. And in a secured safe that seemed excessive for brewing work were credentials that would have transformed how Colorado's chemical industry viewed their brewery quality control worker. A PhD in chemical engineering from MIT, senior engineer credentials from major chemical companies, and consulting agreements with the EPA that had shaped how the United States regulated industrial chemical processes. Dr. Carl Friedrich Weber, internationally recognized authority on chemical process safety and contamination control. His career had focused on developing manufacturing processes for petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, and specialty chemicals that required precision and safety margins far exceeding anything food industry applications demanded. But equally important, he'd established safety protocols that prevented chemical accidents in industrial facilities where process failures could kill workers and affect surrounding communities. The work had taken Carl from laboratory research that advanced understanding of chemical reaction kinetics to industrial applications where his designs enabled safe production of everything from plastics to life-saving medications. His expertise had been crucial in developing the safety standards, contamination control procedures, and emergency response protocols that governed how American chemical companies managed processes involving toxic, explosive, or environmentally hazardous materials. Retirement in 2008 had been voluntary rather than mandatory. Carl had accumulated enough years in chemical engineering to retire with full pension, while still young enough to pursue work that didn't involve the regulatory complexity and environmental liability that had characterized his corporate career. The brewery position wasn't about financial necessity. His chemical industry pension provided comfortable retirement income. It was about applying chemical knowledge to food production rather than industrial manufacturing, using process expertise to create products that brought people pleasure rather than advancing chemical processes that often involve environmental risks, and continuing to work with chemical systems that challenged his analytical abilities while contributing to a more enjoyable aspect of human culture. But 37 years of chemical process engineering expertise doesn't disappear because someone changes from industrial chemistry to food production. And Carl's trained understanding continued monitoring chemical safety issues that could affect both brewery operations and consumer health. Thursday, October 10th, started like every other quality control day. Carl arrived at Rocky Mountain Brewing at 7 a.m., reviewed overnight fermentation data from the automated monitoring systems, and prepared for another day of chemical analysis that would ensure beer quality and safety throughout the production process. The morning proceeded normally until 10:30 a.m., when Carl observed something during routine batch testing that triggered 37 years of chemical contamination investigation experience. Beer samples from 3 different production lines were showing chemical signatures that weren't immediately dangerous but indicated contamination with compounds that shouldn't exist in brewing processes. The concentrations were low enough to escape standard quality control testing, but they represented chemical contamination that could cause serious health problems if concentrations increased or if exposure continued over time. Dr. Weber had encountered similar contamination patterns during pharmaceutical manufacturing, when trace chemical impurities had indicated production problems that could affect drug safety if not identified and corrected immediately. Production control, this is Carl in QC. I'm detecting trace chemical contamination in samples from lines 2, 4, and 6. The contamination isn't registering in standard testing, but it indicates systematic problems that could affect product safety. Carl, our automated systems aren't showing anything unusual. All parameters are within normal ranges. Carl's chemical engineering training activated pattern recognition that had been developed through decades of investigating industrial contamination that had caused everything from worker poisoning to environmental disasters. Production control, I'm analyzing chemical signatures that suggest contamination with industrial solvents or cleaning compounds.
This type of contamination can cause liver damage and neurological problems even at concentrations below standard detection thresholds. Over the next 6 hours, Carl conducted systematic analysis using techniques learned during 37 years of chemical safety investigation. Chemical analysis using laboratory equipment he maintained for precision testing, contamination source tracking through process analysis, and safety assessment that evaluated potential health risks to consumers. What he discovered was worse than routine production contamination. The chemical signatures indicated deliberate contamination with industrial compounds that would cause chronic health problems without immediate symptoms that would alert consumers or medical professionals.
Dr. Carl Weber was looking at evidence of chemical terrorism targeting the food supply. He needed to report his findings to appropriate authorities, but doing so would require explaining how a brewery quality control worker possessed the expertise to conduct chemical contamination analysis that exceeded capabilities of most commercial testing laboratories. Dr. Weber faced the choice that would define his impact on food safety. He could file routine reports through standard food safety channels, hope that FDA investigators would eventually identify similar contamination through their own testing, and risk allowing chemical terrorism to continue while bureaucratic processes slowly addressed threats that were actively poisoning consumers. Or he could use 37 years of expertise in chemical process engineering to protect food safety the way he'd been trained to do when similar threats emerged during his industrial career. Dr. Weber made his decision in approximately 15 seconds. He contacted the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations through professional networks that retained his security clearances, identified himself by credentials that carried immediate authority among chemical safety officials, and provided detailed analysis of contamination evidence that indicated coordinated chemical terrorism affecting food production throughout the region. FDA Criminal Investigations, this is Dr. Carl Weber, chemical process engineer. I'm documenting systematic chemical contamination at multiple brewing facilities that indicate intentional food supply tampering with industrial compounds designed to cause chronic health effects. Dr. Weber, this is Special Agent Patricia Chen. Can you provide specific details about the contamination patterns you've identified? Carl's voice carried the clinical precision that had characterized thousands of similar safety consultations during his corporate career. Agent Chen, I'm analyzing contamination with industrial solvents and cleaning compounds at concentrations designed to cause liver and neurological damage over extended exposure periods. The contamination pattern suggests coordinated tampering at the raw material supply level, affecting multiple production facilities. Sir, our food safety testing protocols haven't detected the kind of contamination you're describing. How are you identifying chemical signatures that aren't apparent to standard testing procedures? Agent Chen, I'm using chemical analysis techniques developed for industrial process safety and pharmaceutical contamination detection. The compounds I'm identifying are specifically chosen to avoid detection through standard food safety testing while causing cumulative health damage. Within 48 hours, federal agents specializing in food terrorism were working with Carl to analyze evidence that revealed one of the largest chemical terrorism operations in American food industry history. The contamination had affected beer, soft drinks, and processed foods distributed throughout the western United States, designed to cause long-term health problems that would be attributed to lifestyle factors rather than deliberate poisoning. Dr. Weber, how did you identify the contamination patterns so quickly when our established testing procedures missed them? Agent Chen asked during the investigation coordination. Carl looked around Rocky Mountain Brewing that had been transformed into a federal crime scene investigation center. Agent Chen, I've spent 37 years learning to recognize exactly these contamination signatures. Industrial chemical contamination has specific characteristics that become obvious when you understand process chemistry and how contaminants behave in different manufacturing environments.
The investigation that followed exposed a domestic terrorism network that had been systematically contaminating food supplies as part of a coordinated attack on American public health. Cause analysis had prevented what could have been chronic poisoning affecting millions of consumers across multiple states. The story remained largely within chemical industry publications, protecting both operational security and Carl's privacy, while ensuring that food safety protocols received improvements based on vulnerabilities that had been exploited by criminal organizations. Carl returned to his brewery quality control duties, serving production operations with the same methodical precision that had characterized his pre-emergency work. But something had changed in his relationship with the food safety community and his understanding of how his expertise could continue serving consumer protection. "Carl, thank you for identifying the contamination problems," said Susan Rodriguez, Rocky Mountain Brewing's head of production, during the post-emergency analysis. "The FDA investigators said your analysis probably prevented thousands of people from developing serious health problems." Carl looked around the quality control laboratory, where enhanced chemical testing now provided additional safety protection for consumers throughout the region. "Susan, I've been working with chemical safety for most of my adult life. Whether it's industrial processes or food production, the principles stay the same. You have to understand how chemicals behave and what happens when they don't belong where they are." "Were you really a chemical engineer?" Carl smiled, adjusting his brewery quality control coat that covered federal credentials he'd hoped never to need again. "I've spent my career making sure chemical processes work safely and produce products that don't harm people. Now I get to apply that knowledge to making sure people can enjoy their beer without worrying about their health." Dr. Weber continued his brewery quality control work until he was 81 years old, serving as informal chemical safety consultant for the FDA while maintaining the trusted quality assurance that kept Rocky Mountain Brewing's products safe and enjoyable for thousands of customers. Because he'd learned that the most effective chemical safety often comes from people whose expertise exceeds their visible roles, whose dedication continues regardless of official titles, and whose process knowledge serves both individual companies and consumer safety with equal commitment to ensuring that food production enhances rather than threatens human health and well-being.